Hello and welcome to another episode of Dr. Frothgar's Professional Minarchist channel. This is episode 2. The date is 10/9/2018. It is a Tuesday. And this is my new mic, so I probably sound a little bit better than I did on my last episode. So this would probably be, I guess, my first official episode. My last one was more of an intro video talking about my influences and the things that maybe pushed me to create a channel of this sort. First off, I want to say that I'm not going to edit my voice at all. I'm not going to edit the voice track. I know a lot of YouTubers will cut out the ums and the other filler words to make them sound more coherent and put together. I think that is disingenuous. I think it's something that makes them sound less conversational, and it makes their voices sound more choppy. So instead, I'm going to work on it. I'm going to work on pausing instead of using filler words, which if you've ever spoken publicly or spoken on YouTube, you know that that's tough, easier said than done. But I'm going to work on it. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. The topic today is the role of the church in a minarchist society as a solution to the entitlement problem and also the problem of rampant identity politics that seem to plague the national consciousness today. So I would say that if we don't find a way to stop spending so much money on aid programs, and right now I'm going to only talk about domestic aid programs. Don't even get me started on the foreign aid programs that we spend so much money on year in and year out. That can be saved for another video. But when we do spend this much money, we end up running ourselves into the ground, and I think that we can see that happening today. The national debt clock is a good example of that. If you go and check that out at any point in time, it's almost always on the rise. Private donations, I think, are not really going to cut it at this point. If we wanted to maintain the current entitlement state, it would take basically Bill Gates and Warren Buffett devoting all of their personal worth to funding these programs if we were to continue in our current state. And I'm not asking them to do that. I don't think anybody's asking them to do that. So I think the only way to so if we wanted to maintain the level of security, which I don't think we should, but if we were to, the best way to do that would be to crowdsource the problem, which, I mean, countless politicians nowadays are doing this, taking small private donations in favor of larger interest groups or NGOs donations. So crowdsource the problem through the church. Finding the funds would be much easier. Most avid churchgoers do adhere to the whole, 10% of your income should go to the church. So 10% of everyone that goes to church's income in the United States could possibly work to alleviate some of the problems that we see in terms of homelessness, affordable housing, food stamps, medical costs, things like this. So Jordan Peterson has said it multiple times and in different forums that hierarchical structures both need to exist and that they dispossess a certain amount of people. And the struggle between the right and the left is the conversation surrounding these truths. So how do we prevent hierarchies from becoming too rigid? How do we take care of the dispossessed that inevitably exist at the bottom of these hierarchies because they don't have the required skills that are desired in today's society or the arrangement of all possible hierarchies? So some might say and I think Jordan Peterson might say this, that it's the job of government to step in at this point to help out the dispossessed and to provide aid to those who cannot provide for themselves. However, traditionally in the United States, I'd say really up until the 1960s, the church took care of the dispossessed in the United States. The people that couldn't provide funding for medical care for themselves were taken care of by private hospitals that were attached to churches. You had people that were building boarding houses. You had people that were building, private food pantries, and those still do exist today, but not on the scale that they used to. So pre-1929, if somebody was needy or poor enough to need food, water, clothing, shelter for short periods of time, before they could get back on their feet, go get a job and get back on their feet, they could go to the church. The church also helped to fund, again, as I said, medical care for the impoverished, and they established hospitals in the name of saints to provide that service. The social gospel movement, a term first used in 1886, galvanized churchgoers to actively address various social problems. And by the early 20th centuries, charitable church activity played a vital role in helping the needy. And so, this is all from a study done by Jonathan Gruber and Daniel M. Hungerman in the Journal of Public Economics that was published in 2007. So I'm going to link that article down below the video if you want to go check that out. So I just kind of took little bits. So that was the thing about the social gospel was actually a quote directly from that. And I'm going to go ahead and finish that right quick. So the church social work included vital varieties of activities such as employment services, hospital visitation, cooperation with government, correctional, and medical institutions, and other social service agencies, advocacy for social causes, educational services such as job training and basic hygienic instruction, and various programs to aid the poor. So while their reading found mixed results, their analysis of the data that they pulled together found that as government expenditures on social services increased from 1929 to 1939, so the Great Depression, the amount of money that the church spent decreased dramatically. So that precedent that was set, like as government starts to spend more in these areas, we should spend less money because they're taking care of it. That's a really, really dangerous precedent to set, because that means that the government is now taking the role of the paternal, right? They're gonna take care of the populace, which up until that point really wasn't a thing. It was the individuals should pretty much take care of themselves, and when they can't, the church, the community would step in and help. And if that really wasn't helping, then we could get the government involved. And at that point, if it's not helping, that usually means that they're committing crimes. They're doing things that the government would take care of anyway, right? So they would go to jail. They would then be rehabilitated through the prison system and then released back out into society. So the failure of government comes in because something that effectively took care of the people, particularly those that could not care for themselves, out of the hands, it took that out of the hands of the church, that responsibility out of the hands of the church and the community, and it put it into the hands of those who only wished to increase the amount of power they had over the lives of the people, right? So while you could argue, as Keynes basically did, that the church was unable to handle the sheer volume of hungry and poor people that wandered the streets during the Great Depression, you could also argue, using Keynes once again, that the government was not supposed to keep that power, and that the social agencies that grew out of the Great Depression, or the reaction of the state to the Great Depression, such as the Social Security Administration, the U.S. Housing Authority, Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, now that has mutated itself into the FDA, which just raided the headquarters of Juul, the vaping company, based on some sort of widely held belief that they were marketing specifically towards teenagers, which is totally not true, right? On the basis of that alone, they went and raided a facility. And why does the FDA have operatives on their staff that are going to raid facility? That just blows my mind, but that's, again, probably for another video. So these agencies should have been dissolved once their purpose had been served, right? That's what Keynes said. And again, Keynes, towards the end of his life, was very, very, very apologetic of the way that he had let his ideology be taken to an extreme. He saw that students, academics, they were all taking his philosophy and ignoring really the last part of it, which was once the alleviation is done, once the government program has served its purpose and we're back to normal, get rid of it. Right? Once the Great Depression's done, get rid of those programs. Go back to the way things were. It's not complicated, but once the state had that little taste of power and their involvement in the lives of citizens, and they felt that, oh, now we have the power of the paternal, right? They turn to us when they have things that go wrong in their daily lives. They couldn't let go of that. So this did not curtail churchgoers from going to church. Right, the Great Depression. In fact, I think I read somewhere that churchgoers actually went to church more often during the Great Depression because they were in peril. They were having to try and find answers to things that were tough to answer. They had things going wrong in their life, and that's usually when people go to church more often, especially people that don't frequent churches. But however, with all the tithe money that was coming in, they had to find new ways to spend it so that they could maintain their nonprofit status, right? So that led to the establishment of these mega churches, and you have these televangelists in the latter half of the 20th century that were eventually plagued by scandal. Really, I mean, Billy Graham might be the only one that, at least on the national stage, that avoided some sort of huge scandal. The guy that headed up the Crystal Cathedral in California, I think he pretty much escaped unscathed. But you can read the People magazine edition from like the 60s, the 70s, 80s, and they'll talk about scandal after scandal after scandal after scandal that happened with these televangelists. And that's because they kind of lost their way, right? So the mega churches today, you got Prestonwood Baptist, that's a couple of miles from where I live. Around here we call it Six Flags Over Jesus, because it's basically a flipping basketball stadium. Like the Dallas Mavericks could play at Prestonwood Baptist, and they probably could seat just about as many people as American Airlines Center does. It's horrible, right? They've expanded their operations to new heights by spending millions of dollars on these things that they don't need, instead of caring for the poor at home and abroad. All of this could be alleviated by slowly transferring the responsibility of caring for the dispossessed back to religious institutions in the United States. It could also help with our kind of national identity crisis that we're experiencing at the moment, right? While I don't condone blind nationalism, just as I don't condone blindly following religious teachings, you should always find new questions to ask about what you believe, because I believe that really reaffirms your beliefs, if anything, or helps you mold your beliefs into something more rational because you've, again, rationalized it. There needs to be a moral standard that the country adheres to and agrees upon if they are to be productive and cohesive, right? Rome kind of came apart at the seams when they started down the path of everything is relative, and their moral fiber started to dissolve. With more money in the pockets of the church, or in the pockets of the citizens, not being taken out of their paychecks to pay for these programs and services that they might not ever need, Americans would be able to give more to religious organizations, or causes taken up by religious religious organizations to help the needy, right? So if we got rid of the entitlement establishment slowly but surely, that would put more money back into the pockets of hardworking Americans. They would be able to take that money, and whether they chose to go to church or not, they would be able to give more money to these private organizations and religious organizations that have made it their life's work to help the dispossessed, to help the needy, to combat, sex trafficking in Uganda, or sex trafficking in Japan, or AIDS virus outbreaks in Zimbabwe. It would be much more effective, efficient, and economical, right? Because every time we let the state try and handle one of these problems, what do? They spend more money than they need to, and they take a lot more time than they need to. If you put it in the private sector, it gets done faster and it gets done cheaper, right? That's capitalism. That's what we like to forget. Capitalism works for pretty much every situation, right? And that's again why I call myself a minarchist, because we do need the state. The state does need to regulate the free market to some degree, step in when it starts to dispossess too many people, right? And that's if we go back to what Jordan Peterson says about hierarchies, again, the main split between the right and the left is the right wants hierarchies, okay? And we know from looking at human history as far back as we possibly can that these hierarchies are going to exist regardless of whether or not we want them. But the right really wants hierarchies. The left doesn't want them, right? Because they know that hierarchies will dispossess a certain amount of people. And so they think that without hierarchies, nobody will be dispossessed. Well, that's not entirely true. What we need is the right and the left to come together and think of ways that these hierarchies can exist while not becoming too rigid and dispossessing too many people, but also not completely disappearing. And I think the church can play a vital, vital role in keeping the hierarchies not too rigid, right? While also helping the people that get dispossessed. Because people are going to be dispossessed in any modern society. It's going to happen. There's nothing we can do to take care of everyone. Because some people will have lower than average IQ. Some people will have physical disabilities. Some people will have a predisposition towards violence. People will have a predisposition towards laziness. Anything that can dispossess someone will eventually dispossess someone, right? To some extent. So instead of trying to eliminate dispossession, which is entirely impossible, why not alleviate it in the most efficient way possible? And we know that to be the church, right? It's been proven time and time again. The church does a better job of taking care of people that are dispossessed than the state does. So one final point, I kind of touched on this earlier, but I think the church can also, if it starts to become part of the forefront of society again, and I'm not saying that I want everybody to hear me on this. I don't want everyone to convert to Christianity or to some Judeo-Christian faith. That's not what I'm asking for here. I know people are going to believe different things. I know people are going to want different things out of their beliefs. That's totally fine. This is America. People are able to believe whatever they choose and practice whatever they choose as long as they don't infringe upon the rights of others. However, this country was formed on Judeo-Christian values. That's undebatable. Like that's been proven time and time and time again. So people that say that we weren't are simply ignoring the facts, and people that go all the way to the end of, well, we should basically all be Christians, are being unrealistic. But I do think that having a basic Judeo-Christian moral compass for the entire country is not entirely bad at all, right? There's a separation between church and state, but Judeo-Christian values are pretty much just common decency, right? Like, think about it. So if the Christians and all Judeo-Christian faiths are wrong, right? We all get to the end of the world, the apocalypse happens, and they were wrong. Just flat out wrong. What is so bad about having lived a life based on Judeo-Christian values? Right? Think about that. What are the 10 Commandments? In short, right, if you were to summarize the 10 Commandments in a sentence, it would be, live a decent life. Right? Be decent to your common man. Your everyday neighbor, don't murder him. Don't steal from him. Don't be envious of the things that he has. Don't covet his wife. Don't sleep with his wife or her wife or whatever. Don't sleep with their partner. I'll be politically correct for once. It's not hard to do. And having lived that existence, is that not better than having been indecent to your neighbors? Would it not be better to err on the side of common decency, which I believe the core of Judeo-Christian faith is just common decency? Just treat people, the golden rule. Treat people as if you, as the way you would want to be treated. Treat people as if you would want to be treated. And that actually comes from the Bible. So why not just live that way? And why not just have that be part of our national moral compass, right? Instead of having this ambiguous national identity and moral national compass, I don't know why I keep using the word compass, but that just seems the right way to put it. Why not have, instead of having that, why not have that instead of having people searching for their own meaning in life, right? Because that's what we have right now, and it's led to identity politics. Constant, rampant identity politics. There's an example, I think just today or yesterday, of Taylor Swift talking about, systemic racism and how LGBTQ people have no rights and all these other buzzwords that the SJW left loves to use, and it's nonsensical. It's absolutely nonsensical, and all it does is divide us. All that narrative does is divide us along lines of race, gender, sexual orientation, and pretty much any other way that you can possibly divide us. And it's horrible. It's morally reprehensible. They think that they're doing right by the American people when in actuality they're perpetuating a victim narrative that is never good for anyone. We saw this in Rome and many other great civilizations over the course of human history, and none of it ever ended well. All right, that's enough for me. So, again, this is just my opinion. If you disagree, I actually encourage you to leave a comment. I prefer to talk to people that disagree with me on things like this because the conversations are more interesting. Nobody wants to just sit around and agree with everyone all the time. So be sure to like, subscribe, comment. Again, especially if you have opposing views. If you like what you heard, then I don't discourage you from liking, subscribing, sharing. But let's if you agreed with this video, I'm going to give you a challenge. Go ahead and share this video and on Facebook, Twitter, whatever your main mode of communication is. Instagram, I guess, for you young kids. And tag someone that you know will disagree with it. Right? Be cordial. Don't be like, okay, this kid has it right. Stop being such an idiot. Like, listen to this and change your mind. Be like, okay, this is an interesting take on what's happening today. Let's talk about it. Right? Start a dialogue. That's how we're going to change things, right? We talk about progressivism. How do we progress as a human race? We talk about things. We don't just scream things at each other, We don't just use buzzwords that mean nothing and try and make the other person look stupid. We talk about things. Dialogue is the way forward, okay? So I encourage civil conversation in any form, and I would like to hear your thoughts, particularly if you disagree with me. This is Dr. Hrothgar signing off.